Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting video. This is a dresser that I found on Marketplace, and I picked it up and I noticed it doesn't really have a lot of damage on the top, which is great. And I looked at the back, and on the sticker it says it's made in China or made in Vietnam or something like that. So it's going to be another interesting video with a very thin veneer, and it's going to look great. So now we're going to get these drawers out of here, and I'm actually going to show you what I do with them. I'm taking them out, and then I'm actually going to label them, because some of these dressers, they have drawers that are specifically made to go in certain places, and if you don't mark your drawers and you try to put them in later, and you sometimes end up not knowing which drawers go where. So I've got that, and I'm taking the old hardware off, and I'm going to cover up the holes. One thing I like about knobs is there's no drilling at all. There's no Bondo. It's you take a knob off, you put a knob on. So all those go in the old bucket. And we're just going to wrap these up. And it's pretty simple. We're just going to take the paper and tape it all over. And we're going to prevent dirt from going down into the drawer. Now I've got to get these stickers off, and I'm going to try to use a scraper here and just peel these off. You really don't want to sand them, because you're just going to sand all of that glue down into your wood, and I'm trying not to do that here, so I'm using my scraper to get off as much as I can, and I'm also getting that sticker off the top of the dresser, although I'm pretty sure it would come off later when I strip it, but I just wanted to get off as much as I could anyway. Now that the drawers are wrapped up, we're going to move to the next step, and we are going to use 120 to sand on these drawer faces. The goal is to get down to bare wood around where the hardware goes, because you want to get those old hardware marks out in case the new hardware doesn't cover those up. And it's best to get these down to bare wood, because a lot of times the old hardware marks, even if they're subtle to the eye, they will still show up later with your paint and finish on there. And then if your new hardware doesn't cover it, it just looks awkward, it looks unfinished. So really, I'm going to focus on getting down to bare wood just around those holes. The rest of the drawers don't have to be down to bare wood. I'm just going to smooth them out, and if there's any slight nicks or scratches, we can make those even. If there's deep gouges, I usually just cover them with Bondo. Fortunately for this dresser, I don't think I need any Bondo at all. Usually every dresser has a few things that are just going to have to be left in, because if you're running this as a business like I am, you just don't have time to fix every little thing. And in reality, a lot of people that shop for refinished furniture, they understand that it's, 50 years old or something, and it's just going to have a little bit of character, and people kind of expect that with refinished furniture. So I'm not really trying to get every little nick and ding out, or I would be spending 30 hours on a dresser, and that's just too long. There's no profitability there. So I'm looking to spend a maximum of 8 hours on this dresser with everything. So it's basically, I'm not restoring this dresser to perfection. I'm just updating it and getting it back on the market. This last little bit of sanding here, I'm just hitting this with 220 to smooth things out, and then it goes into the spray booth. But we need to refill my primer gun first. This is the best primer I have ever used. The price tag is hefty, but I guarantee you it saves a lot of time and a lot of headache. And I'll even show you here. I'm starting the primer process now, and you can see where I went down to bare wood on these drawers and where I didn't. You can still see some of the residual stain, and a lot of times with other primers, when you spray over that bare wood, you're going to sometimes have bleed through with other primers. And with this primer, it is a shellac based primer. So if you've ever used shellac, it's a sealer, and it's also, you can use it for a finish. And it's going to seal in those wood tannins. And you're going to see later when it dries how those wood tannins tried to bleed through, but they were sealed in. And that's exactly what this primer does. It saves you time. Instead of spraying 2 and 3 primer coats, you're just spraying one, and then you're moving on to the next step. Another benefit to this primer is it's very thin, so it really doesn't jam up my gun, hardly ever. Once in a while it will, and I will just have to clean it out, but usually it's very thin and it sprays very easy. So now it's time to strip the top while those drawers are drying, and this stripper is not the cheapest out there either, but it works quick and it gets the job done pretty well. My entire business model is quality and efficiency. So I pretty much pay for the best products out there. And it's either to make the process more efficient or it's to improve the quality of the piece. And my clients recognize that and they appreciate that. Nobody really wants to buy a dresser when you know the guy was using the cheapest stuff out there, because then it calls into question, how long will it last and all of that. And I don't want questions like that. So I always use, top quality paint, primer, stripper. Pretty much anything that I use on my furniture is, pricey stuff. But I feel better about that because it speeds up the process, or it really makes me feel comfortable when I, sell this to a client, that they aren't going to call me later with problems. So now that stripper's been on there a few minutes, probably 5 minutes or so, and it's just eating away the old finish. So it's time to get that off, and I just use a scraper, and I'm pressing pretty lightly. I'm not really pressing hard on this. It's coming off pretty easy. And I just scoop it into this dustpan, and then it goes in the trash. And yeah, I'm going to scrape off this last little bit here on this edge. Edges are very sensitive when you start sanding them, so you really want to try to not have to sand the edge very much. It's best to scrape off as much finish as you can. And since this was made in China, I was expecting this to have that plastic trim like my last dresser did, but as I started scraping this off, I realized this is actually MDF. And honestly, I'd rather have the plastic trim because it stains a lot better than MDF does. I have stained MDF before, and it really doesn't look good at all. It's blotchy. I don't know. I would prefer to have the plastic trim, but we'll make this work. So now I'm going to use the mineral spirits, and the goal here is to neutralize the stripping agent with the mineral spirits. So I'm going all over this dresser, and any stripper that dripped off, I'm also going to wipe that, because if you forget about those drips and spray over them, it'll eat away at your primer, your paint, and your top coat. And you really don't want that, because that could fall off at any time. You really don't want that to fall off at the client's house. So it's best to take that rag and get it soaked with mineral spirits, and then just go over the whole dresser just to be safe. That's drying at the moment, so we're going to move back in here to these drawers. And it's kind of hard to tell from this angle. It's a lot easier to see in person, but from here you can kind of see streaks where the wood tannins tried to bleed through. There's some discoloration there, but I could see it when I was looking right at it, but this camera angle doesn't really show it too well. But just trust me, this primer is a one spray and that's it. I have only had maybe one other time in 2 years when I had to use that primer twice. And it's possible I even messed up with it. I'm not sure if it was the primer's fault. But it's a very good primer. So I'm actually going to do 2 coats of this paint. I'm going to do this here, and I'm not really looking for maximum coverage on my first coat. The first coat is basically just spray it on real thin, let it dry, and then I like to sand with 220, and that'll smooth out the primer and the paint and get it real smooth for the final paint coat, because you can't sand your second coat of paint. You'll leave those scratches in when you spray your lacquer. So I like to spray my primer, spray my paint, then I'll sand with 220 by hand and just smooth it out. Then I'll do my second coat of paint, move on to the lacquer, and then I'll do 2 coats of lacquer also on the drawers. So that's drying in the moment, and that paint takes about 2 hours, so give or take. So I have 2 hours to sand this, and I'm going to start with the trim first. I always do the trim first, or the sides, because a lot of times sanding by hand like this, my sandpaper will slip and it'll ride up onto the top. And if you've already sanded your top and then you do your sides and you have some slip ups and you scratch the top, well, now you got to sand the top again. And the more you sand on the top, the higher your chances of going through the veneer. So I get the trim done first, then I move to the top and try to limit my time on the top. And my arms were killing me trying to get this off on these ends, so I'm using my palm sander to finish the front of this. I probably should have stripped the front of it again, but I decided to sand it because if this is a solid piece of MDF, then I can sand this without hurting anything. So I hit it with 120 to get all of that old finish off. Now I'm just going to go by hand, and I'm going to hit this with 220 and smooth it out a little bit. And at this point I was not feeling optimistic about my plan for this, because I wanted to use a kind of a medium brown, but now that this MDF is, you know, what they had for trim, I had a feeling I have to go really dark now, and that's the only way to make that MDF work, because it does absorb stain, which is nice, but it absorbs stain unevenly, and it makes it real challenging. But sometimes you just got to work with what you're given. And right now I'd prefer an all wood, you know, top and wood trim, but it didn't turn out that way. So I'm going to do the best I can, and the only way I know to really mask the blotchiness of MDF is to stain it dark. But I don't really want to stain the top dark, so I'm just going to see what I can do about that. So at this point I was pretty optimistic that I thought this was rubber wood. Usually when you get a dresser from those Asian countries over there, they use a lot of rubber wood over there because it's a hardwood and those trees are everywhere, so they're easy to find. So it's an economical wood for that region. But as I was sanding this, I wasn't sure if this was rubber wood or not. It might be something else, but I'm not 100% sure what type of wood this is. But it's not as light as rubber wood. Rubber wood is real pale, and this has pretty much a natural light brown to it. So I was really happy to see that, and I had an idea in my head what I wanted to do with this dresser, but now I think I'm going to change it on the fly, because that happens a lot actually. I really don't know what I get until I start diving in to a piece, and I kind of have a rough idea of what I'm going to do, but really I come up with ideas along the way. Or I'll consult with my wife and tell her, hey, I got a dresser, I had this idea, but now I've discovered, X, Y, and Z about it, so what do you think? And then she'll come up with a color scheme for it. So right now, I expected pale wood, but I got this light brown. So I'm going to change the stain that I was going to use. And there's still a few scratches here, but I don't think it's really going to show through. I think they are faded enough that they're really not going to be noticed. And I don't want to sand through the veneer like I did in my last piece. So I'm going to quit sanding now. Now I'm going to use a wood conditioner. Since the veneer is in good shape and I didn't sand through it, I now want my stain to go on evenly. And so I'm going to use this conditioner here, and it's going to make sure that my stain doesn't get absorbed too heavy in one spot. You don't have to use a conditioner to stain anything, but when it comes to a dresser top, I would recommend using a conditioner because you don't really know how old the dresser is, and you don't really know how it was stored. Was it in a basement? Was it in a storage unit? You're not sure exactly how it's been kept its whole life. So it's just better to rehydrate that top and make sure that your stain gets absorbed evenly across the whole top. You want to take a clean rag and wipe off the excess and give it about an hour to dry, and then you're good to go. So it's been an hour, I'm back. I'm going to start off with American Walnut. It's one of my favorite stains, and as you can see, it's kind of got this real reddish hue to it, and I like that a lot. But a lot of times there's certain woods that will turn up a little too red, or sometimes they come up as more of an orange color. So I'm not sure exactly how this is going to go, but I know that this wood has already got this natural light brown, so I really wanted to enhance that with this American Walnut. So we're going to see how red it is after this coat, and if it's too orange, then, or if it's not dark enough, I'm going to move on to a darker stain. This is what I mean when I say that a lot of times I don't really know what the game plan is with a dresser, because I will come up with an idea, but I really don't know how it's going to go until I get started. So I kind of just wing it a lot of times. I know what I'm looking for, but if the wood doesn't cooperate, then I have to pivot and try something different. But for now, I'm going to stick with this American Walnut. I want to see how it looks, and yeah, I like to layer my stains. I really don't like to mix them, and I know you can if they're the same brand or the same type. You can't mix oil and water, but if you have two oil-based stains and they're the same brand, I know you can mix them. I don't know if you can mix other oil-based brands. I don't know if I would recommend it, but I know if it's two Varathane oil-based stains like I use, you can mix them and try them on a scrap piece of wood, but I just don't like to do that. I like to go low and slow, and I like to see where I'm going with a piece, and I like to layer my stains on top of each other. So I'll do a layer of stain, I'll let it dry for about 2 hours, and then I will do either a second coat of the same stain, or I will do a different stain on top of that. I prefer to layer my stains so I can slowly see where the wood's going. That's just my preference. I'm sure there's other people that like to mix their stain, and that's fine. I mean, as long as you get the results you're wanting, that's all that matters. So I'm taking my rag, I wipe the stain on with a rag, I wad it up into a ball, and I just spread it on there. Then I let it sit for maybe a minute, and then I take a clean rag and I'm going to wipe off all the excess. The first rag I used, I left it dirty, and I just kind of smeared the stain around, and this is my clean rag where I'm taking off all of the excess. And now I'm going to strike off. I'm taking my rag, I'm going to tuck it in between my fingers, and I'm going to strike off with the wood grain one time, and that will be the last thing I do on this piece until that stain dries. The point of this is, in case you leave any stain behind and there's streaks, You want those streaks to blend in with the wood grain so they're very hard to notice. Although at this point, I think I've taken off pretty much all of the stain that was on the top, but just in case, I always strike off every time. You want to go perfectly straight across. You don't want to make any rainbows. So it's actually, you got to learn a technique to do it correctly. So this is after one coat of the American walnut, and it's not the color I was hoping for. I want to go darker now. So I'm going to put a layer of dark walnut on top of that. And as you can see, this dark walnut, it still has a reddish hue, but it's also got a lot darker brown in it. So I want to make this top a little bit darker, but also the trim, which is MDF, turned out blotchy like I expected. So I'm going to go dark, try to cover up those blotches as much as possible. And I'm also running the risk of my trim ending up darker than the rest of the top. So here you see I haven't flipped that rag over, I'm using the same dirty side. It's a dirty rag technique. And it's kind of massaging the wood, it's kind of taking a little bit of excess off. But I'm just trying to leave that stain on there a little bit longer to let it soak in. And now I'm using the other side of the rag, and I'm going to take off all the excess. I prefer my top and trim to be the same color, but with this MDF, it's like a sponge, and it soaks up a lot of stain. So I pretty much accepted that this dresser is going to be a little different than my particular taste. But the good news is, one thing I've learned with this business is you can make anything and someone will like it. So, I may not like my trim and top to be a different color, but someone will, and someone will buy it. So now the color is pretty much what I'm looking for, and we're going to cover this top, and we're going to get this in the spray booth. So the trick is to get the tape underneath the dresser. You want your tape to be completely covering the underside of the top, but you don't want your tape to go down the sides or in the front. And I'll show you what I'm talking about later. I have an illustration. And the trick is to tuck your paper down into the tape. You do not want the tape to touch your top. Number one, that's got fresh stain, and that tape will pull it off. But another thing is, if you leave that blue tape on your top and leave it there for a couple days and peel it off, it tends to leave sticky residue behind, and that will mess with your finish. So the best thing is to have that tape on the paper and not touching the top. And another thing I'm doing right after this step is I always sand the sides and the front of the dresser. Usually it's by hand. I just take a sanding sponge and some 220, and I just go over the entire dresser. And it doesn't always make it into editing because these videos could go on for hours if I showed you everything I did. So I'm just kind of doing a quick summary. I spent about 8 hours on this dresser, and I'm trying to condense it into a 30-minute video. So there's really a lot that I've left out, but that's one thing I do want to stress, because I have done dressers before where I forgot that step, and I usually will notice it after my paint is on that there's rough spots, or there's something serious that I could have sanded off before I even got to it. So sanding is very important, and if you're looking for being known for quality, then sanding is not optional, it's a requirement. Now that the paper's on, it's time to get the drawers out of the spray booth, and we're going to get the dresser into the spray booth. Yay. As I'm wheeling this into the spray booth, in the corner you can see the next dresser that is up on the roster. And that top looks way worse than that. That's the nice corner. So stay tuned for that video. I'm not even sure how that's going to go yet. So here we are, we're getting the primer on this, and I just go down and back up, and that's one coat of primer for me. And it's kind of a light medium coat, but it worked great. So if you go heavier than this, you'll end up with runs because this primer is thin. So I have my gun pretty much wide open, not all the way, but it's pretty wide open, and I have to move quick because the primer will run if you leave it in one spot too long. So I'm just going to speed this up. Somewhere my gun was starting to act up on me. The trigger was sticking, so I needed to put some oil on it. And I think I did after I was done here, but that gun was, it was spraying long. I would let off the trigger, but it kept spraying. So something was going on with it, and I ended up making some runs here. And this is pretty much how I fix them, because you can let these dry and sand them that way, and that's fine. But what I like to do is I try to dab off the little bit of extra, and then it's easier to sand. There's less sanding later. But you can see how easily this wants to run. So I must have just hit this spot a little too hard, or my gun sprayed too much. I'm not sure. But here's what I wanted to show you. See these arrows? This is how you want your tape. You want it to be underneath the top, but not touching the sides or the front. And I'm actually going to show you what would happen if you accidentally put your tape too far down on your dresser here. And I'm going to do 2 coats of paint, so this first layer I'm just going to paint over anyway. But I'm going to show you what happens when you accidentally have your tape go down too far, which I have done a lot, and that's why I spend a long time taping my dressers up when I'm putting the tape on the paper on the top. I've gone through it a little bit fast in the past, and then I end up spending time later with my paintbrushes doing touch-ups. So it's better to spend an extra 5 minutes on your tape and getting it right, so you're not spending that time later when you're trying to get done with the piece, and now you've got a little bit of time on touch-ups now. It's just better to get it done the first time, and then you're done and move on to the next step. So I'm putting on this sandy brown color. I'm not even sure what color this is. This is a couple colors mixed together that I had some old paint laying around that it was all the same brand. I use Behr paint, so it's all the same brand. There was just a little bit of each can, so I just threw it all together, and I don't even know what color this is. It's probably a light brown, a sandy brown. That's what I was aiming for. And now, as you can see, I'm spraying the inside of the dresser, and I'll show you why I do that. And so now here I'm going to take that tape off. I'm going to show you what happens. There's a little bit of the primer underneath that. That would be a problem if you thought you were done with a piece, but now you're not. So this is why I spray the inside of those dressers. You have 2 types of dresser drawers. You've got the faces that cover the entire section there, and then you have ones that are recessed into the dresser. And if those are different colors, you can tell the difference right away. Now it's time to see the hardware my wife picked out for this, and I think they look great, and I'll provide a link to these in the description. So now we're just going to unwrap this and get that new hardware on and see what it looks like. So we're just going to take this off. A lot of times the screws they give you will match what you're doing. A lot of times they give you the screws where you can clip, and those are very useful. So pretty much every brand I use is pretty high quality, and they always send me extra screws and things like that. So when I'm providing links in the description, I'm not sending you to the cheapest stuff out there. It's pretty high quality. And now I'm going to take the paper off the top. We have 2 coats of paint on there now. and we're going to move to spraying the lacquer on this, and now we can kind of get a sneak peek at how this color scheme is going to work. And really, I kind of like the darker trim versus the top. I think it adds a little bit of uniqueness to it. And it really covered up a lot of blotchiness also, so that's also a big plus. Now I'm just going to spray my lacquer on here. I'm going to do 2 coats of lacquer on the entire dresser, and then I will come back and do a 3rd coat on the top, just because it's a high traffic area and I want more durability on the top. And one of these days I will show you how I mix up my lacquer. A lot of people are nervous about it because they know it's a 2-part thing where you got to mix the lacquer thinner in it, and you know, if there's too much or too little, it gives you problems. So I'll show you an easy way that I do it, and it works every time, and I haven't had issues with it one of these days. But for right now, I'm just gonna, we're almost at the finish line on this video, so I'm just gonna get this lacquer on here. Lacquer only takes about 30 minutes to dry, so that's another bonus. So we're gonna get this on, and then I'm going to get it out of the spray booth and hit it with some 400 real lightly on the top, and we're going to get the drawers in it, and then it's going to go over to my staging wall, and we're going to stage it with various things that my wife picked out that she says are trendy, and I will take her word for it. And that's pretty much it for this video. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Have a good one.